Okay. So number 10 is taking this g of x and saying, how do you get that from the parent function of 2 to the x? So if I start here, I'm going to do it this way. F of x equals 2 to the x. And then the first transformation that we apply gets us to 3 times 2 to the x. And then the next transformation is the plus 1 and the minus 4 there. So at this point, that's the final function. So g of x equals 3 times 2 to the x plus 1 minus 4. And so the first set of transformations, well, the first transformation we have to do is multiplying that thing by 3. So that's taking the original y's and just tripling them. And so that's a vertical stretch by factor 3. So that's the transformation we're doing. And then in the second step here, that's where that plus 1 and minus 4 come in. And so the plus 1, if you remember, is a translation by 1 to the left. Remember, the x's kind of feel backwards. And then the 4 is negative, so that's 4 down. Okay? So these things right here, this followed by this, represent the transformations that are applied. So that's your answer to A. For B, state the domain, range, and equation of the asymptote. Some of you might be able to just do that from the final function now. But if you can't, you can still start with this parent function. Remember, 2 to the x is the parent exponential growth function here. So the domain is all real numbers. X can be anything. The range, y can be positive. And the asymptote, y is 0. So then in order to get the stretch by 3, that only multiplies y's by positive 3. So the x's don't change. They're still all real numbers. The y's, well, y is still greater than 0 because 0 times 3 is still 0. And the asymptote is still y equals 0. The translations are what kind of change things around. Now, if I take all x's, all real numbers, and I translate them 1 to the left, I still get all real numbers. For my range, instead of being at 0, I'm now 4 down. So y is greater than negative 4. And then let's see, the asymptote, I moved 4 units down as well. Okay, so then this here is your answer to B. For C, we need to find the inverse of the function. So let me write out the function this way. This is still the original, but I'm going to change that g of x to just y. So y equals 3 times 2 to the x plus 1 minus 4. And so now the inverse is going to be x equals 3 times 2 to the y plus 1 minus 4. And then the goal is to get y by itself. And y is in the exponents, so that's where you end up using logs. You use logs to find exponents. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides first. And then I'm going to divide by 3 to isolate that exponential term. So we got x plus 4 over 3 equals 2 to the y plus 1. And now I can use my conversion. B to the c equals a turns into log base b of a equals c. So my b is 2, my base is 2. So this thing is going to turn into log base 2 of, so actually, let me do it this way. I think this tends to confuse people a ton. So I'm going to write it the other way around. If A equals B to the C, that's this format. I know that looks weird. That turns into log base B of A equals C. Now, this is just a formula, right? That's a formula. We write it till you memorize it, essentially. But if I color code it, sometimes that makes this a little bit easier. So let me do this. Sorry if colors aren't your thing. Okay, now if you match this stuff up, the b is the 2. The power is the y plus 1. And the a is this whole term, x plus 4 over 3. And now what we want to do is rearrange the form that we're in, which is like this one, into the other form, right? So that's going to turn into log base b. So b is 2. Log base 2 of a, x plus 4 over 3, equals c, y plus 1, the blue one. And now we need to get y by itself. So it's log base 2, x plus 4 over 3, minus 1 equals y. And that's the inverse of this thing. Okay, so log functions are inverses of exponential functions and vice versa. Let's see, I think the last one is domain, range, and equation of the asymptote for the inverse. Okay, so the domain, the range, and the asymptote for the inverse. This is the original. Okay, remember we switch x's and y's, so instead of y greater than -4, it's now x, which makes it a domain instead of a range. And instead of y equals -4 for the asymptote, it's now x equals -4 for the asymptote. And instead of x's being all real numbers, now it's y's are all real numbers. So here is the answer to D.